So we actually were looking at some of the questions that were coming in from YouTube Live and some people that are talking on within the forums. Had a few different kind of topics for discussion today, but one of them that kind of stuck out to me was how do we tell within inside of the accounts if it's more of the campaign fault or if it's more of something else? Like, what are some KPIs that we could look at that say, you know what, I don't really think it's a campaign. I think it might be something else, and I'd like to actually tie it back in with some additional data. And what that means is we'll be able to cross-reference what's happening inside the account. But until you can really manage or review or monitor what's happening outside of the account, you can kind of identify what actually has an increase in efficiency inside of the business from a campaign perspective and what may be doing more attribution. So we'll talk about this on course of Meta and Google. We'll cover both channels. So we'll have some examples for both. And because we kind of like chose that topic and kind of dive in real quick, I'm going to actually pull up one as an example that was just happened about 2 weeks ago, which is actually pretty cool. So we're going to dive into an account and we're going to kind of talk through the changes and what has happened so far. So this one is a little bit, there's a couple little like asterisks. Not everything is always like going to be a perfectly smooth launch, but this was the start of feeder strategy as an example. Now, one thing that we fairly know to be true is that Google is very good at attribution. So some of the things that we should look at in terms of KPIs to know if we're actually achieving our targets is to be able to compare them against both the business metrics and other campaigns that we assume to be on a very particular network. As a example, I'm going to look at, December 16th through January 2nd. This is actually the first kind of few weeks of feeder strategy being launched. Now, when we look at the campaigns and we compare this to a previous period, really the only thing that we did besides having to reduce some budgets, unfortunately, because of inventory issues. That's the bad part. Like, it's not a one-to-one perfect scenario, but nothing actually ever is. So anyway, let's just kind of go through this just in the meantime.
All tools to be used is
right.
what it comes down to.
Right. So we're going to do the same thing, December 16th, January 2nd, and we're going to hop into the back end of this account.
Play some elevator music in the meantime.
Yep. So we got, I'm going to clone this because this was funny. This is kind of like the cross-referencing that everyone has to do. We're going to compare that to November 28th to December 15th. 28th to December 15th. So we have these two time periods here. Now, what we can tell is we've gone from 831 up to 977. So we have some additional first-time customers. We have about 140 additional first-time customers. Now, when we look inside of the conversions here, we can see that we have about 55. Okay, so that's kind of the baseline after before and after. Let's break it down a little bit to identify, is this actually helping or is it attributing more? So if we look at the first week, this December 16th, week over week, we can see in the account that it says, hey, we have 5 less. So we look at December 16th through the 22nd, which is this week here, and we compare this to the previous period, which is December 16th through the 22nd. So this is going from 16 to 22, and we'll do 9 through the 15th. Okay, so 353, 326. We can see that it actually has some more. So 353 from 326. So there's a little bit more there. This one has 18. So if we look at the difference between 326 and 353, we're doing 353. Oops.
I heard that too. I was like, I do that all the time. I don't know what I'm saying that does that.
I don't know. It's my watch all of a sudden it's like sorry, I'm just gonna start talking over you. So 353 minus, then we have 326, 326. So there's 27. This counted 18. Okay, so we're sort of potentially on the right track. We're not sure. Now let's look at the following week, which is the 23rd through the 29th.
And key point with all this is that it doesn't have to be in Shopify. This could be in like any CRM tool.
Yeah.
We're just comparing the back end numbers compared to, what we're seeing in Google Ads.
It really could be anything. So we have now the 16th to the 22nd compared to the 23rd through the 29th. Instead of here, it's like, 44% more conversions, baby. Yeah. The Performance Max feeder is up 219%. Like went from 102 to 147, 44%. High five. What did we spend? 12% less. Nailed it. All right. So what happened to December 23rd? We had 334 customers. What was it before? 353. Shit.
Return.
Yep. So we actually have now lost, if we do the correlation here, so 353 minus 334. So we lost 19 new first-time customers as we scale up in our customer account to 45. Now, this is what tells you where are you looking and what is contributing and what is attributing. Let's look at some individual KPIs. Number one, if we look at Performance Max as an example, this one has a very high scale, which we then can look at and say, okay, well, that didn't actually produce more new customers. Now, we're only running Google, by the way. There is no Meta. So that's really important for us to understand. This is an isolated channel. The Meta activity is non-existent. I'll pull it up here just for everyone's sake here.
Well, we're starting simple.
Yeah, we're starting really simple. Exactly.
Ratios is what we're looking for right now.
Yeah, you can see like last week, Instagram and TikTok and Facebook are bringing like a couple hundred people. Like it's pretty much nothing. Google search is bringing like a lot more. So that's just to be all transparent. It's really no, and it's even going like down. Like there's really like no sales to be made. So we know that this is something that is isolated to Google. So as we add an ad spend, what happens? This attributes 39 more. However, we gain 5, lost 5, gain 6, lost 2. Okay, so it's about really a break even. Now, this is an outlier that is like, okay, that's a massive increase in conversion value, massive increase in conversions, but did it actually take an effect to the 44%? Not what we're trying to achieve. It looks like this actually took more of an existing customer that we're already seeing because they do have a lot of subscriptions, a lot of return orders. It's pet food and it's raw pet food. So raw pet food is going to have a lot of people logging in, making changes, coming back, adjusting volumes, blah, 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 blah. So this is a very good example to say it did not work. Now, that's one of the things that we have to do is if we look at only an app, it's like, hey, feeder strategy is doing better. Right now, no, it's not. It looks better. But what happens is because we haven't started to actually scale anything outside of it, like the standard shopping or searches, we only really turned on PMax and everything else kind of wavered. That's why we've gone down. It attributed, but hasn't contributed. We had to get this thing essentially launched and started. It's going to go through a whole bunch of people that it already knows. It's like, wow, look at all the people here. And look at how many people are adding stuff to cart. Like, this is great. I'm just in the land of conversions and I'm just going to count 219% more today because look, I'm here now and I can see everybody. So that is something that will tell you, obviously, okay, this is not working. You increase you increase actually the second portion of feeder. We haven't actually run feeder strategy yet. We've launched the secondary action. We haven't started scaling what we know is to be our non-brand campaigns. So this is live and it actually has not helped at all. That's very, very good for us to then establish. Now, how would we know that besides looking through the back end? Maybe there's a whole bunch of stuff here that is, that's actually, doing good. Like, let's just say we didn't have access to the back end. We don't know it's omni-channel. So there's like a billion different things going on. How do we say, okay, if it's not clear cut and dry as in metrics, how do we know? Well, you can also look inside of like first click attribution instead of the back end of Shopify. That's some area that if you don't have third-party attribution, you can use. Now, this sometimes will be a little bit more susceptible to issues just because the attribution is not going to be great. So Google and Shopify sometimes attribute the same.
UTM is not the best. Just throwing it out there.
Exactly.
Don't trust UTMs.
Exactly. So we look at 23 and 29th. We have like, let's say first click. We have Google paid 78. Let's see the time period before that. Google paid 71. It's looking about the same too here. We lost a few actually. So yeah, it's kind of showing the exact opposite of what this is showing here. So that's one thing that you can do if you don't have third-party attribution tool. Just be like, well, what does Shopify say the first click is? Google's going to say the first click is them because they're new on the scene. But what does Shopify say? So that's the first thing that you would want to look at. The second thing you want to look at is what is the what are the normalcies that you're typically seeing in the other account or in other campaigns? And then you can also measure, do I expect that scenario to be true? So I would say in this scenario, just looking at the fact that I have scaled this up, the CPA has come down, the ROAS has come up, and then the conversions have exploded, and everything else was kind of unchanged or potentially, about the same from the economies of scale down. Yeah, I would say that what happened here was that all of the users that these campaigns were going to be targeting no longer have the ad spend to target. This does. So we just kind of robbed Peter to pay Paul, and then it found a whole bunch of more. How did it find a whole bunch more? Well, when we're looking at the CPCs, we can say, okay, well, if this is $5, $7, $3, $3, $2.50, this is $1.50. And it's going down. Probably not competing for high placement like these are. This is going to be doing more display remarketing. I can infer that by saying this is a low CPC in comparison. Now, we want that to be remarketing. That's true. However, I understand that as it starts to remarket, it can hyper attribute, because now it's moving into the area where it can just simply show up for everyone and take credit for everyone, whether they started with me or not. So as it pushes into remarketing, I expect this to have amazing looking performance. When I updated the client on this metric, I said Performance Max looks fantastic. That kind of worries me because it has a whole bunch of people here that it can actually target and convert, quote unquote, for its own gain. But this looks like it's reacting very oddly. We pulled ad spend down and this thing shot through the roof and your new customers went down. So I think this is just attributing the sales that are going to come in anyway, plus attributing previous users. So then we look at the week afterwards and then we say, okay, what did we do this week? Now I forget the week that we scaled. But go ahead.
Side note with that too is like Performance Max will do this even if there's no brand terms in the searches. Because it's display remarketing. So I just want to say that for everyone, that if you're looking at the actual search terms and you don't see brand terms in there, don't think you're fully safe. You have to look for these other signals like we're talking about right now, because it hides in there. Super common. This is probably the number. I would say this is probably one of the maybe top 3 issues that we see in accounts.
Mm-hmm.
I would say maybe even top 2, aside from like Ecom Prod ID not firing.
So here's the thing is with Performance Max, and I'm going to find the point of scale. I think we started to scale up like here is the last time we actually scaled up 26 through this time period. Let me just see. But then I'll cover that too. Okay, cool. So Caden is correct in explaining when you're looking at Performance Max, you have a bunch of different channels: search, shopping, YouTube, GSP, Discover, Display. Like can go on all of these channels. Even feed only can go on shopping, display, Gmail, search. And well, PLA can't really go on search. It can go on shopping, it can go on display, it can go on YouTube, it can go on Gmail.
If you turn off the DSA portion, if
you're doing just PLAs like a feed only, it can still go on 4 networks. So it's not always like this is hitting the right network. So when you turn off the branded search terms, you're shutting off 2 of those 6. So they can't inbound get a shopping ad, they can't inbound getting a search ad. But that doesn't stop the campaigns from targeting people outbound. So the audience doesn't change. The channel as to which Performance Max can attract the audience changes. So PMax will still go after Caden, just now it goes after Caden on display instead of inbound search or inbound shopping. So just because you don't see it in the insights does not mean that it is it's not going after warm and existing customer audiences. The next thing that we have to look at is now we've started to scale. So we scaled on January 26th to February 10th. So if we look at, let's say, January 26th to February 10th, we'd have to look at this and say, okay, we're 512 new customers compared to the 10th through the 25. So to look at the 10th through the 25, 512 was 453. Okay. So 453 and 512. Now, what we had to do is we had to increase pretty much everything here 100% except for Performance Max. Now, what I expect is to have a cost that's scaling up and the conversion value that's moving along with it. We have a fairly long sales cycle in this campaign, so in this account, so I'm not too worried about it. But what we're looking at here is just our incremental. So if we look at 8704 divided by the difference between 453 and 525, Whoops. So 453, 525, 525 minus 453. Nope. I can't type. Yep, 72. So we have 72. And then we also have to look at our other. Whoa. Look at this
72
here.
more new customers.
Yep. So now we have an ad spend increase of 8,704 divided by 72 new customers, which is $120 incremental NCAC. Now, what's funny is we come up with $120 incremental NCAC. This is showing 53 because it's going to have a whole bunch of existing customers in there for sure, especially in Performance Max, which is down to now $8. Jesus Christ. But what we're trying to do is I'm expecting if I increase ad spend across the board, except for Performance Max, I should see a conversion value increase across the board. Also in Performance Max. Performance Max did gain the most, 54.56. I'm just not going to give it any more ad spend. It doesn't need it. This is pushing into more and more and more remarketing, which is pushing the CPA down now to like $6 and is just basically kind of becoming like the massive leader in the account. But as I add in ad spend in these 5 campaigns, this one continuously looks better and better and better. Now it's up to an 8% conversion rate. But what that's done in the account is keep our conversion rate. I have 10% less conversion rate at scaling 90%. Excellent. Like this is just the first kind of few, 14 days. This actually was going extremely well. Unfortunately, it was doing really well. We just end up starting to run out of products, and I forget which one it was, but it wasn't Rabbit. I forget what it is. But our products actually started to go like kind of out of stock in random times. So it interrupted our scale, and it was I forget exactly where it was, which one it was, but that's what we found out this last week. I'm like, hey, why is this going like really good and then stopping, and then really good and then stopping? And she's like, oh yeah, it's because like we have products that are just like out of stock now. We're like, oh, okay, awesome. Like things just gotta evaporate. So we're holding right now until we can get more stock. Then we're going to scale again. But right now, as we scaled, things kind of went boom, like out of stock for 2 days and 3 days, and sometimes up to a week here and there. So it doesn't have the best performance yet, but it's moving there. But that's something that we have to kind of take into consideration.
So trend lines, still look in platform if you need to, if you don't have a third-party tool. Looking at ratios, specifically the incremental gains. And then if you see ROAS increase heavily on PMAX, be concerned. But I think that kind of goes into saying like with any...
Sorry, this is one of the things I apologize. This is our chicken. Like we had like chicken ramp up and then ramp down, then ramp up. So that was, to sell raw chicken, that's going to be like one of our main products that we really want to sell. We only sell beef and chicken primarily. So that was the reason why this last week doesn't look good. We scaled 3 different times.
Products out of stock in stock.
Yep. Okay.
Makes
so
sense.
That was just an example, but that is something where if you're looking at how do I know if something's not working, or how do I know if it's the campaign or the account that's doing well, but it's what are the KPIs to know that may suck? Well, Performance Max obviously is going to be the toughest one to see, but those are some things that you can look into. And I'll pause there because I cut you off, Cam. I just want to finish that thought. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just summarizing what you're saying in terms of just like you're looking at ratios of change on the back end. So you got, X amount of incremental increase. This causes, what to happen in the account. And then I think the biggest thing to take from this is like whenever you're building an account, make sure that you segment warm and cold traffic as best as possible. Because you can go in and see like, and in some cases, if you have, a standard shopping campaign in there, or even just like a regular search campaign in there, and it shows cold terms, like they don't have any brand terms, all cold terms. There's still a potential of that to be warm traffic from potentially other sources that are just seeing your ad pop up. So super, super key point is it's easier to segment because you can pull more levers, but it's harder to tell if, everything's lumped together. And even if it's segmented, you can't 100% know. So you have to look at the back end first to correlate the ratio differences between like what John was showing, and any CRM tool, any spreadsheet, whatever the case is, doesn't matter as long as you have something to go off of.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what's kind of nice is like the best thing you always want to look at too is if you have to have top line metrics. You really have to. Otherwise, if you're stuck to in-app, that one's, I launch a PMAX campaign, things get 44% better. They lose new customers. I've been fired off of that enough to know that that is not a good metric to count on. So knowing that in-app metrics are not a great metric to count on, we have to pivot towards, okay, what else can we look at? What else can we refer to? And that's where you have to know those top line metrics. If you add an ad spend, you start a new campaign and it looks good, does it actually perform well? Then you can kind of see the metrics and they start to become clear. They start to make more sense. Oh, the CPC looks too low or the too high. Maybe it's actually competing against your standard shopping. Your TROAS targets are high enough to push that CPC down. So now I have two competing campaigns and the same performance. They're just flip-flopping off each other. So all of those things that you kind of have to look at, like what KPIs, is that what you're expecting? And I think that is where it comes down to the individual, media buyer or manager of the account, just because if I hop into something, I won't have any familiarity with it. I don't know what to expect. If I add something, I know PMAX is going to over attribute. That's kind of established. So we know to expect that, but still say, hey, it didn't really work. But I'm not going to use that to push ad spend into that. We want to push elsewhere because we understand how PMAX works as an algorithm. So that's what's kind of interesting, is like looking at where you're going to be making your pushes and pulls. If it's not actually affecting your top line MER or CPA or anything else, that would be a big indicator. Now, the same thing happens on Meta, but it happens actually a lot less frequently, crazy enough. But one of the things that I would say is the biggest thing do
you think it happens less frequently due to the attribution?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This will still go very cold and very warm when it needs to and that kind of stuff. So there's still the same issues. It's not like Performance Max where it's like as aggressive and can't grow. Like Meta can grow into cold way better than Performance Max can, like a 10-to-1 ratio. It's unreal. But I'll share with you this here. This is a company that we're basically having to kind of completely restructure. We're actually starting a new Meta campaign for the reason. And because for a very, very long time, about $783,000 worth of ad spend in this account, there are massive amounts of purchases. And they've turned it off. They left it off for like a month. They turned it back on. Like there's some things that these things will just kind of go through like random stages. I think these new ones have been running since this time period. So we've actually ended up like pausing the campaigns for a little while, just seeing how they did. And I think it was a few months ago, or this one I think was like going down from a high amount of ad spend to like basically like nothing. So whether you're spending, I don't even know what, $600 a day down to like nothing, no matter what they did in this account, it never made a difference. We use RBE in the back end. This RBE here, it stands for really big engine. And this is actually, I know it's something that they custom made in the back end. And I have like a new versus returning report. And so I can see at any query and any one of the accounts that we have running, how much new versus returning sales and what the order account is. So when they paused Meta, this really didn't change. It actually made like $2,000 more. So they came to me because I was running the Google ads and like, hey, John, we kind of like double ad spend, pause ad spend. Nothing in Meta seems to actually make a difference. And one of the things, and I always like I always will look at this as a rule, like how to identify that this isn't working, how to think like, John and Caden kind of thing. The first thing I always look at is the attribution settings, because I always want to have an equal amount or more clicks compared to views. And you can see the massive discrepancy here. Out of like $700,000 in ad spend, out of this many conversions, this is what took place in clicks. So 251 out of 1,800, 82 out of 655, 340 out of 1,400, 1,000 out of 563. Yep, 7 out of 3,000, 1,000 out of 5,000. There we go. 11 out of 29. That's looking better. But that's one of the things I would say is this is definitely more attributing than anything else. And these people do have 20 years in the business. They invented the online forklift certification. They have a ton of clients, and these ton of clients return back to them all the time. That's why in this last month, there's $100,000 in returning sales. Like and this is just in the one account, like massive, massive, massive stuff. So what Meta was doing is saying, okay, great. You have more returning sales than new. So as long as those returning sales are plentiful, I'll just show ads to people who are going to convert anyway, and we'll call it a day. So you pause that, nothing happens. You double the ad spend, nothing happens. So each time that they've been making changes, nothing has happened. I said, hey, just pause it for 30 days. Let's just see what happens. They pause it for 30 days, nothing happens. So I was like, okay, let's rebuild. And here's the reason why. Yes, it's showing ads to people. Yes, they're seeing these ads and converting, but it's actually not because of it. It's simply just attributing of it. Now, this is, yes, an attribution model issue, but the problem is if you take over an account with this attribution model, you can't just change this. It's something that is, set in stone for those campaigns. Exactly. Yeah. So you have to analyze it by saying, okay, do I think this is actually working? No. If I'm not getting click engaged conversions and I'm getting 1-day views for 80% of my conversions, probably safe that this isn't doing much at all. So that's the number one thing that I would say is if we're looking at it, maybe it's the campaign suck and maybe it doesn't. This could actually have a great effect on people if they're just seeing ads, and then they go buy. Fine. Maybe it's missing, who knows, missing conversions, tagging issue, whatever. If I pause the ad spend though, I should see sales go down.
But you don't.
That's, right. That's to tell you it. Now, if this is a
Yeah.
shitty campaign, nothing would happen. If this is an excellent campaign, which it still could have been, it could have been an excellent campaign with just great view attribution. Pausing ad spend would have had the prospect or the project go down. So this is a way to say like, no, it's not necessarily that the business is wrong. This is 100% pure. Yep, that campaign's not working. It looked great, but it is absolutely not going to work.
One of the principles I always like to say whenever looking at accounts is like, because that's a dramatic test. That's like, okay, we pause ad spend for 30 days. Like that's a risk. And like some clients might not be comfortable with that risk. And so I always try to, I don't know if you think the same way, but I always try to lean on like the percentages where it's like, if I'm over 50% confident, then I want to try it. If I'm under 50% confident, I don't want to try it. Simple as that. Yeah. So if like you had that same scenario that popped up, you see a ton of view, a ton of clicks, instead of being 100% confident because you saw ad spend be totally cut, you may be like 70% confident or whatever the case is because you've seen this happen in other accounts. Okay, view attribution is not always going to be correlated to back end numbers. And the same thing applies to YouTube as well. You just can't change it, unfortunately.
Yep. Yeah, right. So. And here's another thing to think about too is like it's if you're saying like, hey, none of these scenarios apply to me, and there's actually something else that could be going wrong. What I would, and here's what's funny is I would actually spend additional time in the tracking section. I really mean that. One of my partner / clients ended up changing a cart upsell, and it was on a specific cart page. Then they changed that to Cart Rush, and then they went, they changed it to Cart Rush, and I didn't know. I just slowly saw my conversions kind of dying off a bit, and I'm like looking through and wondering, checking tracking, and everything kind of looked fine. And then there was a separate redirect though that he was putting a whole bunch of traffic to. And it was like 80% of the traffic was going to like an order sell, upsell, recharge, rebump kind of thing. So I didn't have any visibility on like 80% of the conversions that were coming through of the path that took that path. So all of a sudden he's like, hey man, I'm going to test actually going back to Shopify as the order bump. And I'm going to hop off Cart Rush for a short term for a few days. I'm like, okay, cool. And as that happened, my metrics basically just exploded in this 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, this 6-day period. It's like 192% more conversions, 199% more conversion. I mean, everything, conversion rate up 80%. I mean, like everything just all of a sudden started exploding. So the campaigns actually started to meet goal and started to spend more. So like this little blip, all of a sudden it's like 45% spend more, and then 182%.
That doesn't happen normally.
Right. And so that's what's funny. It's like for $22,000 more, we get $93,000 more. That was already happening. I was managing the account and managing the campaigns as it was already happening because I'm like, this looks good. This just can't be right. We got third-party tracking installed and it shows $60 CPA. There's NCAC. So I was like, okay, that even looks good. But as soon as the upsell that was being funneled through went back to where the tag actually was, yeah, everything's fine. So like, this is where I'm like, no, I really think this is the account because was performing well. Like I know this is performing well. The metrics show bad, but I'm like, I don't really care about in-app metrics. I start scaling this a little bit and things get better. And all of a sudden the tracking comes back and it's actually 192.12% better than I thought. That was just because of a simple tracking issue. So, larger companies, tech stack moves quickly. I just wasn't roped in at the time that happened. Okay, whatever. So just kind of good kind of thought process there.